In this demo, I'm going to modify the existing Azure AD application and the .NET Core Console app to add support to display information about all the groups that a user is involved in as a member or as an owner. So this assumes that you've already created the Azure AD application and the .NET Core Console app. The first thing I need to do is I need to update our Azure AD registration, app registration, to grant it additional permissions. So I'm going to jump over to our Azure AD application, and I'm going to add in a couple new permissions. So I'm going to add a new permission for group or directory read all. So we'll find directory read all, and then I'll select add permissions. And then I'm going to go ahead and grant admin consent as well, like I did in the previous step. Now we're not using our group or our read basic permissions, but that's okay. We can just leave those there for now. I am going to go into our console app though, and I need to go find where I had the permissions defined. And we're going to change this from using, instead of read basic all, I'm going to say directory read all. If I scroll up to the main method in our application, we can get rid of this whole section here that talks about grabbing the group that the groups that a specific group, and instead I'm going to add in some code here that is going to get a list of all the groups that the current user that signed in is a member of. So I'm going to the me endpoint, and then I'm using the member of endpoint or a property for this. This is all exposing all the groups that the user is currently a member of. Next, let's add in a little for each statement here so that we can display a list of all the groups that the user is a member of. So here we're walking through all the results that we got back, and I'm checking to see what kind of a group it is. We're getting a reference to the group and then the group role. So what this is doing is it's checking the object that's returned by the query if it's a group or directory role. And the reason for this is that the member of collection in the Microsoft Graph .NET SDK that's mapping to the member of endpoint, it returns both Office 365 groups as well as security groups. Security groups are represented as objects of type directory role. So what this code is doing is it first tries to cast the returned object as both of the different types of objects, and then it checks if the objects are null to display the appropriate one. So let's test this out. So I will rerun our application running .NET build and .NET run in succession, and I'm going to be prompted to authenticate first. So I'll pass in my username, and then I'll pass in my password. And this is listing out all of the groups that I'm currently a member of. Now notice that you can see there's one at the very top called role, and I'm being listed as a security group as a global administrator. And then all of the other groups below that one are Office 365 groups. In addition to getting a list of all the groups the user is a member of, Microsoft Graph can also return a list of all the groups the user is listed as an owner of. So this is done using the owned objects collection on the user resource. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace all of this request number 1 code that you see here. I'm going to replace it with the following. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so what this is doing is it's looking at the owned objects property, and it's going to walk through all of those and write out all of the Office 365 groups or security groups that I'm the owner of. So again, we're going to go rerun this by running .NET build and .NET run in succession. And then I'm going to authenticate. So I'll pass in my username. I'll go grab my password. And now it's listing out all the groups that I'm an owner of. So you can see here that I'm an owner of multiple Office 365 groups. And then the last part where it shows that Microsoft Graph application, that's another object type that I'm also a member of, and it just is listing out the ID of the object that I own. It does show that I'm not an owner of any security groups though, because we didn't have any of those come back. So in this demo, you saw me update the Azure AD application and the console app to add an additional permission of directory.read.all so that I could retrieve all of the groups that I was not only a member of, but also those groups that I also am an owner of.